and modernisation, and we can only do that with your assistance. So, without more, I will hand over to our first speaker, Ian Diamond. Thank you, Ian.
Nicola, thank you very much, and colleagues, can I thank you very much for listening to this, which is going to be a run through both the process of how we went about our work as a task force, some of the findings, and then finally some of the recommendations. Before I do anything else, could I echo Nicola's thanks to all the members of the task force who constituted Vice-Chancellors, senior administrators, members of the private sector, as well also as mentioning the great work by two of Nicola's colleagues, Chris Hale and Jamie Arrowsmith. I should also say that in the development of this work, Chris and I met with all of the relevant mission groups of different universities and institutes of higher education so as to enable them to have some input. And I think that has actually helped hugely the development of the report. But first, a little bit of the context. I don't need to tell anyone that we face difficult financial times with pressure on public finances, and that in England, at least, a new way of funding higher education. And one of the things that I think is absolutely critical about that has been that the political imperative for universities to be seen to be making efficiencies at the same time as receiving and working in the new fee regime. And I think that's an incredibly important agenda, and I won't talk much more about it because Ian, I'm sure, will talk about the work of the Efficiency Reform Group. But I think it is important to recognise both A, that we have a political imperative to make efficiencies, but B, and speaking as a Vice-Chancellor, and I know most of you as senior members of your universities, we have an imperative anyway to always seek to make efficiencies so as to improve the student experience and the quality of the research that we do. But can I just say very clearly that in terms of the way we carried out the work, this is not a piece of work which is about reducing cost per se. Because we've got to acknowledge UK higher education, the way, whichever way you look at it, is one of the UK's great success stories. And we impact on the quality of UK higher education, I believe, very strongly at our peril. That is not to say, therefore, that we just tick along doing what we've done for a long time, but simply that any savings and any efficiencies that we bring in have to be in the context of maintaining both effectiveness and maintaining quality. And that is absolutely at the forefront of all that the task force tried to do. Just to clarify what is in the report, this is a focus on operational efficiency. We say in the report very clearly that much of university spend is, if you like, on academic issues and staff pay, and that we believe that there's a very strong case for a further task force from the UK which looks at that area. However, what we look at is operational efficiency, what drives that efficiency, looking very clearly at what we've been doing in UK higher education, and I think it's only fair to say that this is not a new agenda for most of you in this room, I'm sure. But at the same time, identify new ways and say a few words about how that can happen. And in so doing, our mission was to shape a new narrative, one which demonstrates progress, if there is some, and just a hint in a minute I'll say that there's a lot, to acknowledge, though, that we're not complacent and that there's a need for further efficiencies, and to see how, in the new funding environment, we can take that forward. And critically, to say that we as a sector are prepared to work together and to co-regulate in a way which will enable us to be able to make efficiencies and to be seen so to do. And at the end of the day, as Nicola has highlighted, to provide a framework for action. I'll run through some recommendations, and the next stage is a pretty tight and ambitious timeline with, again, I'll make some suggestions on who leads on those actions. So let's just start with the findings. I mean, the first thing to say is that, if I may say so, the response to this from the university sector rightly is, look, tell me about it. We are always looking to make efficiencies. We are always looking to improve the way we do our work, and we are acutely aware of the new funding environment and this message. And I think that's good news. The second message, which comes out very clearly, is there's much good practice in the sector. I'll be absolutely honest, the sector has, I think, been very good at making some innovative and, I think, excellent initiatives in efficiency. I think it's been pretty poor in communicating them sometimes, and I think there's a real challenge to us to be much better at communicating them. Having said that, I think we would only be right in saying that we are not complacent about the challenges ahead, to say that there are barriers and constraints. I'm going to run through some of the recommendations a little bit. There is fragmentation. Sometimes, as ever, there are mindset and cultural issues. And we will make some recommendations also. We do make some recommendations also to government about some of the regulatory constraints which exist. Let me just turn, though, firstly, to if you like, where we are, and to say something about, well, how do we know how we are doing? Well, I think one of the reasons that we don't quite know how we're doing as a sector all the time is that we need better data, and we need to get serious about benchmarking. We have also, I think, to be absolutely clear as a sector that we wish and we're proud of being transparent. So to me, transparency and benchmarking are absolutely essential. The other thing that the findings show very clearly is that while there are data, such as track in itself, while very, very useful for the organisation and management of universities, is not in itself a way of being able, at this time, to be able to compare costs effectively and efficiently across universities. That's not what it was set up for. Let's not criticise it for so doing. But it does mean that I think we do need to improve our data. And benchmarking practice itself is currently piecemeal and fragmented. So I'll come back to these in a minute when I come to recommendations. Thirdly, we say very clearly that one of the things that we must improve on is streamlining our own processes. We have seen some excellent examples, Nottingham Trent University, with a whole agenda around one version of the truth, is an example which my own university, I think, should look at. Because often in universities there are many spreadsheets which don't always talk to each other, which are addressing the same thing and don't always say the same thing, although they believe they are saying the same thing. We believe also that there are opportunities for improvements in shared services, although I have to say I think that the first shared service is getting everything right and similar in one's own university. But there are issues around VAT, and we were, Ian, if I may say so, very encouraged by the note in the Chancellor's statement about looking and consulting again on VAT in shared services across public sector. And we believe that there are huge potential and some good examples of outsourcing with the private sector, and examples in accommodation. I'll come back to in accommodation and IT. Our second finding, and here much of what I say in this little section on procurement relates to England, and as ever, sitting in the second most northerly university in the UK, Scotland is doing rather well when it comes to collaborative procurement. But it is fair to say that we believe that procurement is not always seen as a strategic part of higher education, but it should be. Only about 10 to 12% currently of non-pay spend going through collaborative procurement, and as a result, as I shall argue in a minute, we believe there's significant potential for improved collaborative procurement across the sector. And we believe, looking at regulation, there are areas where regulation is costly, for example, freedom of information, and where it could be reformed to facilitate savings, for example, European Union procurement regulations are one example where there are potential. So let me now move from a kind of, if you like, the general findings to some recommendations. First thing to say is that we believe very strongly, and the task force is absolutely clear on this, that interventions to make efficiencies should be part of the strategic plan. They're central to the mission of the university and to improving the effectiveness and quality, as I've said earlier. Secondly, there needs to be a proper business case. There needs to be clear views on the savings and the benefits expected, and there needs to be robust data on which they can be managed. We say again, the key area, one of the key areas is better and leaner internal processes. Can I then just say a few words now in the recommendations about data and benchmarking? Frankly, transparency and benchmarking are critical. We need better data on operational costs, and we believe that it is essential that we put together a relatively small set of comparable indicators, and we do so pretty quickly, which can be published annually and against which efficiencies can be measured over time. There's a clear question that I think we have to address in doing that, and that is, when do you take day zero? Because as a number of Vice Chancellors rightly pointed out, in the last 2 or 3 years there's been some major changes, and it would be wrong to have just taken 20% out of one's back office costs, for example, and then day zero then starts. So we need to think about when to start, but at the same time, we believe that there is a real need to get a set of benchmarks together, and with those benchmarks as a sector to be prepared to produce those data and to co-regulate. And we suggest that there's no need to set up a new body to manage this. We suggest that the Financial Sustainability Strategy Group, currently chaired by Professor Jeff Crossick, would be a sensible place for, if you like, the production and the publication of those benchmarks to come. There are some issues. People have said, well, if we're doing this, what are the implications for competition law? And we need, I think, just to get advice on that. On shared services, if you look through the report, there are I was about to say gazillions, but that's probably an exaggeration, but there are very many examples, and there are gazillions of other examples that aren't in the report, of good practice for shared services in many, many areas and many, many arenas, and there are new ones starting all the time across a wide range of spaces, from energy through HR, through finance, through procurement. But of course, let's just recall that this isn't completely new to the university sector. What I haven't seen, and it'd be nice to calculate, is the savings to the sector over the last, I'm not quite sure how many years UCAS has been going. It's a lot. But UCAS, let's remember, is a shared service, so is JISC. And there are good examples of how we can work together. And I think we just need to, against a very clear agenda of having a proper business case and knowing what the benefits are, to see where there are opportunities. We also believe that in so doing, it's often better to join into things that work rather than set up completely new structures. A few words on regulation. Just to be absolutely clear, we believe the government should implement a mandatory VAT exemption on shared services across the public sector. I think that's, frankly, a good thing. Secondly, we need to look at the position of HEIs in some of the public sector regulations, particularly procurement, in the light of the new regulation. For example, if as a result of the new funding arrangements, universities were, I think it is, to go below 50% of public spend, then there is no need, as I understand it, to be part of EU procurement regulations, and that would, it seems to me, be a helpful way to offer some opportunities. And there has to be, I think, a better understanding of freedom of information costs, and we believe that the university should engage with the post-legislative scrutiny of FOI. On procurement, we believe that there is a real opportunity to develop a national body for procurement in England, and again in the second most northerly university of the country, following the Scots. We believe that there is an opportunity, though, for the UK to promote good practice through a centre of excellence. And we believe, the task force believes, that it would be sensible to establish a minimum target for England of 30%. So a modest increase of non-pay spend channeled through collaborative agreements, and we believe that that could lead to considerable savings. So, the other area I just wanted to say a few words about was IT, because we also believe, and there's quite a bit in the report on IT, that there are real savings there. Now here's an area where outsourcing can work. A number of universities have outsourced their student email to Google, for example, put it up in the cloud, and that makes considerable savings. There are a number of examples of shared IT advice services. There are also shared data libraries. So there are opportunities across the entire spectre in IT. And I think that if I was asked what are the three things where there was the most opportunity for efficiencies, I would go through getting one version of the truth in one's own university, improving collaborative procurement, and improving IT. Those to me, so I stress that's a personal statement, but those to me are the three, if you like, ones that I see the absolute most promised, and that does not in any way undermine any others. For example, in my own university, we're currently looking with the other university in Aberdeen, Robert Gordon's University, at the development potentially of an onshore wind facility to save energy. And I think there are opportunities there. Although again, there are potential regulatory issues about the costs of entering the grid in particular areas. So real opportunities, real challenge, and what are the next steps? Well, here we are. Bullet point 1 and 2 already achieved. This is the sort of trajectory that you'd like to see. We are now working on the detailed action plan. The task force will meet for a last time at the very beginning of November to sign up on the action plan. And we will be looking, as part of that action plan, as I say, to develop the transparency, to develop the benchmarks, and working with the professional bodies, all of whom I think have been very helpful in the task force, to look to seek opportunities to share good practice. But fundamentally, let us remember that decisions that are made here are those of individual universities themselves, and what we must do as a sector is promote good practice, share good practice, be prepared to monitor against our efficiencies, while at the same time very clearly retaining the important autonomy of our own institutions. So thank you very much. I hope you enjoy the report, and thanks again to all that contributed to it. Thank you.